Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Iinuma. Our company is Strategic Systems Group. We are a Los Angeles-based IT consulting firm and experts in enterprise resource planning. I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Peter Moore. Peter, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Peter Moore, president of Wild Oak Enterprises in Santa Monica, and I work with CIOs and their senior leadership teams, helping them evolve IT from a cost center support function to a revenue driver that directly impacts revenues, margins, and profits for companies, and eventually get them to be strategic partners at the big boy table.
That's terrific. All right, very good. Okay, so why don't we do this? We have a topic that we kind of alluded to in our last conversation about artificial intelligence. So why don't we start there? So we both have some pretty good insights into artificial intelligence, and there's a couple of blog articles that we've each published. So why don't we go through and ask some questions about those blog articles?
Right.
So one of the very first things that you mentioned in yours is that there's an extremely high failure rate of AI projects. So I mean, what's the failure rate and what's the cause?
Yeah, there's a company called Tech Republic that did a very, very exhaustive study. And what they found was over the last several years, literally billions and billions of dollars spent by global companies on AI failed to achieve the desired result. I mean, they said 85%, which means it's just stunning the amount of money that has not gotten any kind of real return on AI. And I think there's a couple of reasons behind that, Brian. One is, first, most people start off and they look at the technology, but they don't ask the fundamental question, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and how is AI going to help us solve it? And absent that, you're just chasing AI as kind of the bright new shining object. But the other thing that I think that's important to help the people that we talk with is, what are the sources of failure? And there's at least 4 that I've now identified and started talking to CIOs and their teams about, and they acknowledge every one of them. The first is a lack of sufficient quantity of data. So lots of companies have data, but it's not easily accessible. And as you know, AI can only learn from the data it's exposed to. So if it has limited data, it can't really do a lot in terms of learning. The second is the quality, lack of quality of data. So you may have a lot of data, but if it's not really well organized and easily sort of segmented and compartmentalized, again, it's sort of garbage in, garbage out. The third part of it is they have really little understanding of the whole costs and time involvement in getting their data right. And you and your organization spend a lot of time helping companies with data lakes and all that stuff, so you can talk more about that as well. And the last thing is, they don't understand that AI is on a life cycle. They think it's not a set it and forget it technology. It's continually evolving. So if you don't incorporate all those processes, it's very difficult to get any real impact in return from any AI expenditure.
It's sobering how much money there is going into it and the little result. You have some ways to not be in the 85%. So what are some of those ways that people can leverage AI properly?
Yeah, one of the most, I think, effective ways to get started is just to create what we call an AI literacy and awareness program. Because the other thing about AI that a lot of companies don't understand, it's not just about the technology group. The entire organization, the C-suite, the board, all have to become literate about AI, because in many cases, it's a very major expense and investment for the company. And if you do it without that knowledge, you're just sort of blindly throwing money around. So the programs we put together say, okay, how are we going to get smarter about AI? Well, the first thing you can do is, there are a lot of experts out there, go through some of those, pick some, invite them into your company, ask them to come in, share their knowledge, ask them why things are failing so much. The second thing is, start to archive. We talked about, you and I have written some blogs, you and your colleague are writing a book. Start to archive the artifacts and articles that say, okay, here's some best practices, early practices that work. The third thing is to go visit companies in your industry or related industry who've already successfully deployed AI. How did they do it? What mistakes did they make? How did they recover those mistakes and not make them again? And then two other ideas. One, hackathons are a really effective tool. And you probably have used those a lot with your clients. You get, it's a really good way to everybody gets a hands-on feel. What is this? How does it work? What are we getting out of it? And so, but importantly there, start to say, where's the value going to come? And ultimately it will come with your customer and your employees, and we can talk more about that in a minute. And then the last thing is, there's some pretty well-established vendors out there. Now, you got to be careful because the vendor really wants to sell their approach. What I would do is sort of comparison shop. See if you can get a range of different services and products that different vendors that provide AI services provide, and then decide what's best for you at this point in time.
Wow, that's really good. In your article, you also talk about impacts, and they kind of fall into two categories. One of the impacts is for customers, and the other is for people within the organizations. So how does that unfold?
Yeah, let me start with the employees first. One of the things, and this is where I think you can do some fairly low cost, high value, high impact experiments early on as you're sort of going up the AI learning curve. When you look at most big organizations and you survey and talk to the people who do the majority of the work, particularly in operations and all the systems of record, they can spend up to 50% of their time on manual tasks of just maintaining the systems of record and doing a series of any kind of record keeping tasks or other tasks, all of which AI can be used to automate. And so what that means for the employee is they're not spending a disproportionate amount of their time on low value items. You can then, if you will, outsource those to AI, freeing up the employee to do more high value things. So you start talking about employee retention. It's going to be huge. If you talk about recruiting, it's going to be huge. Really good people in AI don't want to work on maintenance stuff. They want to work on things that help the organization grow. And then the last part is the customer value. And I'll just give you one statistic that really summarizes the whole value proposition. Of all the data that was generated, Brian, in 2020, around the globe, 2% of that data that was generated, was then reused and redeployed in some fashion in 2021, which means 98% of the data that resides in all these companies isn't even being used. Now AI can go in and start to bring that out and start to get those percentages up to 10, 15, 20%. And just think about the impact. If you can go from 2% using data to make really good decisions on how you improve, the value to your customer, up to 20%, I mean, the financial return should be enormous.
Oh, that's terrific. Alrighty, how about we switch gears? So I mentioned to you that a colleague and I are writing a book, and we're going to use chapters of the book to create blog articles. So the first one that we published recently, it was actually yesterday, that we published was on the concept of intelligent ERP. So maybe let's go through a little bit about that notion, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, it sounds great.
All right, so maybe one of the questions that kind of pops up first is what is intelligent ERP? And we didn't invent it, so it's out there in the ether. But the notion of intelligent ERP is to infuse various aspects of artificial intelligence into the ERP application. And there's a plethora of places where that might happen. So one of the things that kind of comes to mind kind of right away is supply chain optimization. So that's kind of the crux, essentially the bread and butter of an ERP system, especially as it applies to manufacturing and wholesale distribution firms. So from that perspective, it's kind of clear indication that yes, if with sufficient data, as you point out, there's an opportunity for a machine learning algorithm to help optimize the supply chain. That is kind of a primary driver.
No, it also sounds to me like, and we've talked about it in an earlier discussion, there's a lot of trapped value that AI can help release, right?
That's fair, absolutely. So you talked about the 2% of data. I think that it's a common theme. So we have organizations that have data, but they're in silos. So one opportunity is to pull them all together into a data warehouse and then apply machine learning algorithms to the things that make the most sense. And as we talked about in previous conversations, that AI might not be the solution. It all depends upon the problem. So I think that's a kind of interesting perspective.
Have you also seen, Brian, the fact that in order to really get value out of AI in these early stages, you've got to find some talent that you might not have in your organization with that kind of skill set?
Okay, that's absolutely true. And sometimes it's a little bit discouraging because we have some clients where their literacy for the ERP system is quite low. In those cases, sometimes it's hard to get the implementation done because they need to have some understanding of how the processes flow in the system. But you're absolutely correct. I think today there's awareness, at least, that there needs to be a better literacy as far as AI is concerned, but they're still at the very infancy stages, at the very beginnings of that journey.
And what about, I mean, can they outsource it to a managed services company to help with AI early on or not?
Okay, also an interesting question. Many of the services organizations like ours, they're basically focused on implementation and support of ERP applications. A few of them, so we have some cohorts that have done some very interesting things with AI, especially in the ERP space. So for example, there have been some situations where forecasting is important, and my colleague, who's an expert in this area, indicates that yes, classification is certainly a good way to do things with AI. However, prediction is even more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that is kind of specific to the ERP space is to be able to forecast. And maybe not just forecast sales by itself, but to forecast sales down to the product line first, and then from the product line to the individual product. And that helps enormously from a supply chain optimization perspective.
Yeah, no, that sounds like really good segmentation work by product and by different categories. The other part of the AI thing that you've also talked about is when people are engaged in these kinds of sort of data exploration kinds of things, how do they, well, do you have some examples of where they have actually found what I'll call sort of early entryways into this exploration? Because I think a lot of people look at this and go, "Oh my God, it's so big, I don't know what to do with it."
Yes, sir.
Have you helped them find sort of early trials and early entryways? Are there a couple of examples of how you've done that?
Sure, I can give you some. Maybe these aren't real recent, but they're still
Yep.
insightful types of observations. Case in point. So we had an opportunity to do a data warehouse for a client. And the data warehouses are nothing special. It's pretty much just a database and collection of things from various sources. So it's just data. One of the things that was kind of eye-opening was an analysis of their inventory. And I think that in general, managers and executives have a sense for kind of the broad perspective of inventory. So it's worth whatever, $15 million of inventory. But maybe they don't understand too much about the breakdown of the inventory. In other words, one of the first insights that one of our clients saw in a demonstration was that of the $15 million in inventory, 5 million was marked as obsolete or set for disposal.
Yep.
So that was eye-opening to them that they had that much obsolete inventory. So that's a situation where there's an opportunity to kind of understand why that was happening and then to take steps going forward to decrease. The other thing that I think was also eye-opening is to see the transactions that take place. So while managers and executives know that the balance sheet is showing a certain dollar value for inventory, the inventory or the financial statements don't show what the activity is on those items. So I think there's an opportunity both from the purchasing side and the sales side to understand the activity and then to take steps to improve business efficiency.
No, that sounds like a really, really great way to you're just seeing literally capital that's inert and is never really going to have any value. That's terrific.
Terrific.
Last question is, where do you kind of see the near-term future? I mean, where are you seeing people beginning to get traction? Because we've talked a lot about the fact that most people aren't. Have you got a couple of examples of some people that are seeing their way clear to getting some value out of AI?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think that in general, the data is key. So one of the things that came up in conversations with my colleagues is that, yes, in order to make use of artificial intelligence, you got to pull that data together. ERP systems and for that matter, CRM systems have a plethora of data to work with. So I think that in the early stages, right, those two examples, go and grab data from the CRM system, go and grab data from the ERP system, and then see if it is clean enough. Apply your cleansing step, for example, to make it usable, and then go and apply machine learning algorithms to the structured data. So I think in those cases, the data is key. One of the other, I think, experiments that's worthwhile is to kind of understand the problems. So we talked about this in previous conversations. AI might not be the solution. There might be some other aspect of business process or system automation that would actually solve the problem. AI might be a solution, but it's not the only one.
Sounds good.
All right, terrific. Peter, as always, great speaking with you.
Same with you, Brian. Thanks.